The battle of wizards and warriors continues with iron swords. The evil wizard Malkil will take the shape of the earth, wind, water, and fire. Farewell! The fate of the world is in your hands!
You're listening to the Piercing Wizard podcast, and I'm your host, Ryan Willett. I'm a professional body piercer with 20 years experience. I travel around the world teaching technique and safety classes, and I'm a member of the Association of Professional Piercers. Listen in as I talk to my friends and colleagues about our industry so we can all stay sharp. Amsterdam. All right, we're recording. We are on your birthday holiday, which is vacation if you're an American. We're on birthday vacation. I gotta put this lower. In Amsterdam. Who are you? Where are you from?
My name is Lola Slider.
Why do you always turn your voice down so tiny when we start talking on a microphone?
This is how I sound all the time. Right. I don't know what you mean.
All right, make it so. This should be the point where you feel it's appropriate to introduce yourself.
You make it sound like when we're not recording a podcast, I'm like, "Hey, Ryan." Like, isn't that weirdly loud?
Well, yeah, when you shout.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, who are you?
My name's Lola Slider, and I'm a professional body piercer and studio owner from Glasgow, Scotland. My shop is Forest Piercing, and right now we're in Amsterdam. Taking a few days off, and my studio is in the capable hands of my apprentice Jordan and my co-piercer Becca, who it looks like are doing a great job from what I can tell from Amsterdam.
Do you intentionally hire people where their first initial and last initial are the same?
You know, I realized that the other day, that they're JJ and BB, and then I felt kind of rubbish that mine don't match.
Okay. Well, you could change your name to Lola Lider.
Lola Lider?
Or like Slola Slider.
I quite like Slola Slider.
All right, well, you know, it's Ryan Roulette and Slola Slider coming to you
silent.
From Amsterdam. Yeah. And we were originally going to talk about some apprenticeship stuff. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit at the end, but I think a conversation just kind of fell into our lap this morning.
It did.
From a post that we saw in the APP Members Only Forum on Facebook. And someone posted that they were kind of frustrated, kind of disappointed with piercers basically saying like, no, we're not comfortable taking out your jewelry to put in retainers. No, we're not comfortable doing downsizes unless we're doing a full jewelry sale. So we're happy to downsize your piercing if you get a new backing and a new front. Otherwise, it's not really something that we have the time for, have the interest for. And I can completely get how that scenario could be frustrating. And if people phrase it that way, like, yes, I can understand the frustration in a way. But from my perspective as a piercer, business owner, especially with very limited services available in a day, I kind of interpreted it differently, and I would like to kind of talk about what might make me say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable doing your downsize, I'm not able to do your downsize, or the same thing with retainers. So what are your thoughts on that? And I want to kind of gradually ease into it because we have actual notes that we prepared for this episode.
Ryan has notes.
I have notes that I prepared for the episode. She has tea that I prepared for her.
Yes. Well, like with most things, you know, you and me, our brains just fire away a bunch of scenarios whenever we're presented with any kind of problem or any kind of issue. And so pretty much straight away we were kind of like, well, consider this or this or this. And there are so many sides to it. It's actually a more complicated subject than just a yes, I do that, or no, I don't do that. And I already have a whole section on this particular subject on my website. So I already had kind of fully formed thoughts about it beforehand. So we thought it would be an interesting conversation to kind of talk about some of those caveats and considerations. I'm definitely in agreement that just kind of shutting the door on a client, physically or metaphorically, is not only bad for business, but it's not necessarily showing the kind of spirit that you want for your tiny corner of the industry or my tiny corner of the industry. But conversely, you know, there are two sides to every story, and it certainly wouldn't be the first time that someone had embellished the truth in a certain way to create a certain picture, so we don't really know what it was that happened.
And we're talking about clients embellishing things. I wouldn't want to say that it was really the poster, because they probably had like a narrow window and they didn't really give
absolutely
full details and context. Basically, one of the things they said is that a client contacted and said, hey, you know, I've tried 6 other studios who all turned me away. But I think part of it is we want to talk about why we might have been Studio 7 and Studio 8 that also said no, and why.
Yeah.
But let's get into it.
Okay. After you.
Okay. So let's start with retainers. Okay. So after the worst of COVID lockdowns, I noticed a flood of people that were contacting our studio saying, I have an MRI scheduled, I need all of my jewelry taken out, I need retainers put in everything. And I was also noticing that almost none of those people went to the website and booked a jewelry change appointment. We have a self-book option on the website. Hey, we call it Body Jewelry Sales and Service. And not everything is a sale. Sometimes they are just services. We're happy to change jewelry if it's something that they previously got from our studio. We are happy to sell them new jewelry, sell them retainer, whatever they might need, but it needs to be scheduled because there's time that goes into it. There's time to sterilize things, certainly time to remove, install, paperwork, all those different things. Now, a lot of the people that were contacting our studio, Precision Body Arts, Nashua, New Hampshire, contacting us for that specific service of, I need all my stuff taken out for an MRI, I need retainers put in. Almost all of those people would call us the day before their MRI appointment. They wouldn't have an appointment. We would already be fully booked for the day, and they would really be like kind of hostile about it. Like, what do you mean you don't have time? It's so simple. And it's like, well, if it's so simple, why can't you do it yourself? If it's not that simple, that means that there is something that goes into it, which we need to have a reservation for, basically, so that we have the time. In my studio, we're still fairly limited because of, personal reasons. We do have limitations on how many services we can offer in a day. Our staff are human beings. They have families, they have children, they have responsibilities, and it's not something where I can say, hey, you have to stay late and you have to do this thing for someone that didn't schedule. I understand that some MRIs are scheduled with very little notice for the people, especially if there's a long wait for an MRI service. But still, we can't just shove somebody into our appointment day, unless we have a cancellation or a light day or something. So we run into that scenario all the time. But then it also gets to this extra layer of complication that you were talking about, where it's not just, okay, take out my jewelry and put in a retainer. It's, okay, what happens next? What happens when they come back and then they want jewelry reinstalled? So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Well, just to kind of tag on to what you were saying about availability, that was another thing that we discussed earlier, was how, for me certainly, and probably for you as well, it's not a huge deal if occasionally, and this is quite often for both of us, I think, we stay late at the end of the day. We say, look, well, I'm finishing up at this time. Why don't you just come down then and I'll just see you before I go home? We do those situations all the time.
Or cutting our lunch breaks short to get people in, all kinds of stuff.
So much so that in the instance that you actually say no, people do tend to get quite upset. I don't know if it's because they're not used to it, but if you have a limited amount of time to squeeze in extra things and take on extra tasks, it isn't totally unreasonable in my mind to prioritize your clients. So for example, if you have a series of inquiries in a day and you have 1 or 2 regular customers who need help and assistance with something, and you have another inquiry from somebody who's never visited the studio before that you don't know, I don't think it's completely unrealistic to say I'm going to have to prioritize people that have patronized my business, because at the end of the day, they are supporting your business financially.
Well, also the people that have already taken the time to schedule an appointment.
Yeah, exactly. You can't take time away from them. So I just think that for piercers in particular that have pets, that have dogs they need to take out, that have children they need to pick up, that have trains and buses they need to catch that could only run once an hour, it does get a bit more complicated to be like, well, it'll just take an extra 10 minutes, it'll just take an extra 15 minutes. We've both been in those situations where something that should have taken an extra 5 or 10 minutes actually turns into a 45-minute long thing that you've then committed to. So I think sometimes it's a little bit unfair to say, well, I don't care what the situation is, I will find time for this person, I will fit this person in. it's wonderful that you have that level of flexibility, but not everybody does.
Or staffing, like not every studio has multiple piercers, multiple counter people, multiple piercing rooms, multiple, whatever.
So
they don't have the capability.
Right. So I wouldn't like to be judgmental of a studio that said, I can't find space for this, because I don't know what's going on with them. I don't know what their personal situation is or what their work situation is. I know what I can do and what I can manage, and I'll try my best to see as many people as possible, especially in situations where, in the UK, for example, you can get a day's notice that your MRI is taking place,
right,
or it can get postponed for months. So you do have to be very, very flexible with those things. So there are situations where someone genuinely may not have been able to book an appointment and this information's just been dumped on them.
Sure.
That does happen. But even then, I think that the scheduling of obligations in terms of what you can manage and when, that's going to vary from person to person and studio to studio. So it probably isn't the best thing to be very judgmental of different people's situations when you don't know what's going on with them.
And just to clarify, both you and I and, the staff members in our studios and all that stuff, we have bent over backwards for people just so often. Like, I can't even keep track of how many times that, you said that you're trying to squeeze in 1 or 2 people at the end of the day who didn't, have an opportunity to book in or whatever. I can't even imagine like the amount of times in just like the last, 3 months that Evan has cut his lunch break short, or that, Lily has tried to kind of juggle someone between the front counter and the piercing room, trying to get in that 13th client on a 12 appointment day, or whatever your system is. Like, we're not saying to be cold-hearted and like, too bad, so sad you didn't have an appointment. But it's not always as simple as like, yeah, sure, just come on in. Like not every studio can accommodate, yeah, sure, just come on in.
Well, that, not to just go down a hole of, complaining about things.
Sure.
That kind of cracked open a whole conversation of all of the various factors that might crop up. When you do say, okay, like, I'll see you. There are then a lot of other things that can happen that need to be dealt with in their own specific way as well. Like, these situations are rarely as streamlined and straightforward as they're represented as. So we were kind of discussing what some of those offshoots are, and these are the things that I've already had to work out and have like on my website, and I know that we've talked about them as well, what your policies are for handling work that you didn't do, jewelry that you didn't sell.
First, Lola, I would love to have that conversation with you, but I would like to mention that I have lots of new content available.
Really?
At patreon.com/RyanPBA. Well, it's funny that you would mention that. You will be featured in a new video that'll be coming out later this very month.
Really?
In March of 2023. Lola has submitted a video to me of her piercing a forward helix on Jordan from her studio, her apprentice, and it's really interesting because my studio, I think if you've heard me talk about it before, I'm very tool-based. I do lots of stuff tool-free, but the tools that I use are meant to be processed. We have a processing room in my studio. You are more of a disposable mentality. Tool-free wouldn't possible, but a lot of the tools and implements that you're using are meant to be disposed of. So you sent me a video of you piercing Jordan's forward helix with a fully disposable method. And then the last trip where I came to see you, we also recorded an extra little segment about you demonstrating how you would reverse direction. If you pierce from the front to the back, how can you install the jewelry from the back to the front, but without having to use a taper? So you demonstrate doing that with disposable needle blanks and connector pins. And I think it'll be a really helpful video. You also recorded a voiceover for it. So it'll be a full video, kind of like the ones that you would come to expect from me personally, but it's featuring you. Thank you. That's very good promotion.
I can say as well, from being on the other side of things, that Ryan has very high standards for these videos. So hopefully you enjoy what we were able to produce together.
Yeah, I made you do lots of takes.
It wasn't the multiple takes. It's that I had to take my glasses off because they were making the light catch the lenses. So I had to take my glasses off, and then I couldn't see. And I was watching the video back to do the voiceover, and I couldn't really see what I was doing in the video. So I was just trying to kind of guess what I would be doing and being like, right here, it looks like I'm doing something, I'm poking the ear, and oh no, that's me piercing the ear. So it took a couple of times for it to not sound like that. So it doesn't sound like that, but it very nearly did. So
well, you did great.
Thank you.
And that video should be put together sometime during March 2023. I also just published a new video, part 2 of jewelry tips and tricks for working with rings. I explained the difference between steel-tipped ring openers and brass-tipped ring openers, working with steel rings versus titanium rings versus niobium rings, and I also show a really handy trick for installing a captive bead ring, a ball closure ring, without having to torque or bend or open the ring at all. A really helpful trick for people there. So, go ahead and check it out, patreon.com/RyanPBA, and I have so much other stuff in the pipeline for the next 2 to 3 months. I have a few genital piercing videos. I have an 8-gauge pubic piercing. I recorded a guiche. I recorded a frenum piercing. So I have a lot of content coming down the pipeline. Oh, and I just published a whole video about eyebrow piercings that a lot of people said has been very helpful. So go ahead and check that stuff out. So back to our conversation. I wanted to talk about maybe some of those things that would make us say no to someone. I'm sorry, I can't do that jewelry change for you. So what are some of the factors where you would say, I'm sorry, I can't take care of that jewelry change for you, and kind of specifically talking about downsizes or retainers?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I don't like to have any kind of a policy that just shuts the door on someone's face and says no. So instead, my website section on this, I can't remember exactly what it's labeled as, but it'll be something like, I've been pierced somewhere else, can Forrest help me? And, the answer is yes. There are just a couple of things that we need to consider. One of them is age. I'm an adults only studio, and that doesn't necessarily change for things like jewelry changes and downsizes. There are certain situations where we've assisted with downsizes and things of that nature, and we've performed, health checks and that kind of thing. But generally, if it's someone that's under the age of 16, I'm going to recommend that they email across some images of the piercing so that we can have a look and consult with them by email, because it might not be something that we're able to assist with, not being able to accept the liability of working on a minor. So that would be a big one. There are also going to be things like if the piercing was done elsewhere, if it's less than a month old, the only service we can offer is removal. I mean, we can offer a health check as well, but we don't offer jewelry changes on piercings that are less than a month old. And that's because I've just had too many instances in the past where someone has had a piercing done very badly at a very inexpensive place that they've selected to go to, and now they're going, oh, well, maybe if I just get some better jewelry put in this, it'll look better, or I've been pierced with jewelry that's too small, or whatever it is. That kind of immediate fix-up, I don't offer that anymore. I'll retire the piercing, and then once the skin fully heals, happy to do it again. It's actually not going to cost that much more, because most of my costing for piercing is in the jewelry, not the service itself. So it's really not going to be that much more expensive for a client to retire and redo a piercing. But I no longer do I had this done down the street 2 weeks ago, can you switch the jewelry out for me? And the main reason for that is just the chain of liability that it creates. I want a solid month between the wound being made and it entering my studio to be handled in any way, because I think that if someone is coming straight to you from another place, there's a real conflict there when it comes to sourcing the liability of who's responsible for an infection that develops around that time period. If anything happens with the piercing, say for example the few days after I've handled it, the original studio will accept no liability, and neither will I, being that I didn't do the piercing. So that's why I have a rule of 30 days. I'm not going to be handling the piercing, changing the jewelry, making alterations. I'll remove the jewelry if you just like to retire it, but I'm not going to be tinkering around with it and changing it and making it look, different or better and altering it, because it's accepting liability for work that I did not do and that I can't possibly be liable for in the same way. And I think a lot of people don't think about things like that. If worst case scenario, this would never happen in my premises given the way that everything is disposable and single use, but given that someone did contract something like a bloodborne pathogen, you want that clear delineation, that clear timeline of who was handling the piercing and when, I think.
Yeah, all that makes sense. There are a lot more problems that we have to say, like, I'm sorry, that's not something we can help you with. You're going to have to consult a medical practitioner, because if someone comes in with a piercing that we didn't do, and it's very, very angry, it's very swollen, it's very, you look at a problem and you're like, a jewelry change is not going to fix this problem. This is, potentially an infection or whatever. If we fiddle with it and we just try to sell them a piece of jewelry, and then their problem worsens, we're going to be the ones who are blamed. We are going to be the ones that could potentially be sued. We are going to be the ones who are going to be liable. It's not worth the risk. Sometimes people might have an issue where it's like, there's no way to save your piercing. We can take it out for you, but that's really all about we can do. But, maybe you should consult a medical practitioner first to see if it's safe to have your jewelry removed at this point, if there is an actual infection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't want to go too far down that path. I think we've talked about that on the episode on episodes before. But one thing that I wanted to talk about, I think a lot of this conversation is probably going to be about downsizes, but one thing I wanted to talk about with retainers, a scenario that's really difficult for us, is somebody gets pierced somewhere else. They're wearing jewelry from somewhere else. I have no problem taking that jewelry out and replacing it with a retainer, but then that opens up a whole issue of when they want to come back the next day, the next week, and then they want to have their original jewelry put back in. We have to tell somebody before we even touch them at the onset, before they even get to the point where they fill out our release form, if your jewelry is not from us, we cannot reinstall it. If it's externally threaded jewelry, if it's something that can't hold up to our sterilizers, if it's something that can't be fully decontaminated, I don't want to put their gunky jewelry into my sterilizer and contaminate it. So that alone opens up a whole thing. Can this jewelry be ultrasonicked? Can this jewelry be processed with an enzymatic solution? Can this jewelry actually be cleaned enough where we can properly sterilize it? And most of the time, the answer is going to be no. So we have to tell them, like, that's really our policy in our studio. We only install jewelry that is sold by us, and that's for a multitude of liability reasons. We can't deal with any sort of issues with external thread jewelry, but also, what happens if the jewelry breaks when we're removing it? Cheap jewelry can break. Cheap jewelry, a gem can fall out.
Or worse, expensive jewelry
can
break. Or worse,
expensive jewelry, yeah. That's something that I kind of want to talk about in relation to downsizing. But is there anything else you want to hit on for retainers?
Just as you were saying, really, that is always a conversation you want to have up front, is just so you understand we can only install jewelry that's purchased here. So these pieces that I'm taking out for you, please feel free to retain them and wear them again if you wish, but I won't be able to reinsert them for you. We're only able to insert jewelry that was purchased from ourselves. That includes things like reinsertions as well. And it kind of comes back to that point that you made earlier of sometimes you do get that bit of pushback that's like, why won't you just put them back in? It's dead easy. And you're like, well, if it's easy, then do it.
Right.
That there's always that kind of conflict there. But I think that's another point as well. It's not necessarily the same as being exploitative and saying you have to buy new jewelry, you have to purchase these new things with me. That's very different from saying I can't be liable for inserting metal into your body that I haven't sourced. Because it's an important part. And this would be for me, and maybe for other studios in different areas, I don't know, but for my liability insurance, for my licensing, I have to be able to produce a receipt for the equipment that I put in your body that I bought. That's important. Even if it's a similar brand from someone else, that's not the same as me having sourced it and me having a receipt for it.
Yeah. Another headache that comes up pretty often in these MRI scenarios is these are almost always going to be 2 visits, and they're almost always going to be 2 visits that have not been booked through our website. If someone's thoughtful enough to call us first and ask, hey, what can you do for me? I'll say, okay, go ahead and book appointment number 1 to have your jewelry taken out and retainers put in. But then also go ahead and book appointment number 2 for us to take your retainer out and put something else back in if you would like us to do that. But please be aware we only install jewelry sold from our studio. And we really just have to we have to draw a line somewhere. Also, something that can get a little bit sticky is we have to charge a service fee for all the services that we perform. I'm not saying it's going to be a $100 visit every time. Sometimes it's just $5 or $10, but I pay my staff an hourly fee because they are professionals. So does that mean that I am just going to be paying them the hourly fee without making any income on that service on that time? And if so, like, there eventually will be no studio for you to come into to have these services done. Like, we have to charge. And like, I know that some of this stuff seems cold and overly calculated, but like, I'm sorry, I'm running a business, you know, like I have to be able to pay my people a fair wage. I have to be able to pay my bills. I have to be able to pay for my utilities, all the disposable supplies I'm going to use, everything that goes into it, you know? Retainers, I charge about $15 for a glass retainer. And if you think that like that $15 glass retainer is going to be like basically close to an hour of services, if I'm sterilizing things, they're waiting, they're coming in, my body jewelry sales and service appointment is 25 minutes. Times 2 is 50 minutes, close to an hour. I'm paying staff. So the retainer is not really generating a lot of profit, of income, so I do have to charge a fair service fee to account for all the time and the materials that go into it. And all those things just get like really frustrating, having to explain those things to a lot of clients who don't see any value in it. They see it as, oh, it's so simple. Oh, it's so simple. Oh, just get me in. It'll only take 5 minutes. And it's like, no. It will only take you 5 minutes. It will take us 50 minutes. And like, you know, who pays for that time? And I'm sorry to sound so cold and calculated, but I'm running a business.
I think that that's something that has changed a lot for a lot of small business owners over the past few years. Is we've been in a position where we've been squeezed to breaking point by, especially in the UK, rising tax, rising business rates, rising rent, quadrupling energy bills. And that extra money has to come from somewhere, and it's been coming from us. It's been coming out of our wages and from our part of the business. And the tiny increases in price that we've been able to just squeeze through, because clients are really struggling as well. So there's a limit to how much you can charge people for simple services. And I charge now a small fee for a health check, which is not something that I've ever done before. And it was because the cost of PPE got so great during COVID, and since then it has gotten a little bit better, but it became so expensive that we couldn't just write it off anymore. We couldn't just say, oh, it's practically nothing, it's fine. We had to implement a small charge for it, and that small charge doesn't cover the rent for that time period that I'm doing that particular service. I still lose money on it. It's just something to help fill that little gap. And I think that's what people do sometimes struggle to understand. So that's why we offer more services by email now, because it's free for you and we're happy to do them all day.
And you can do that in like, you know, spare time, filler time, squeeze it in.
But if you're physically in the premises, just consider how incredibly expensive it is to maintain a brick and mortar premises in any part of a town or city that's in any way pleasant or safe, you know?
Some studios, you know, like I know that you've done it. I know that Gamma has done it. I know that a few other studios have done it, where you've really broken down, like, to the minute, what does it cost me to do this service? If you have to look at, okay, what is my rent averaged out per day? What are the cost of my utilities averaged out per day? And then you look at that average day and you say, okay, I'm open 6 hours, 8 hours, 12-hour shifts. You can really average it down to like, how much does it cost per minute to offer client services? And like, you know, it might sound silly, but I'm sorry, that's the world we live in. Costs go up. The value of our service needs to go up with it, but I don't want to go too far down that hole, because like the value of your service as far as like an actual dollar amount, that's going to vary depending on the city, state, market, whatever you're in, all these different factors that are unique to your studio.
But this is like what I was saying, it's such a tangential subject, it kind of just goes everywhere.
Sure, yeah.
But to get back to what you were talking about originally, downsizing.
Yes.
So for anybody that happens to be listening that doesn't know, explain what downsizing is.
Okay, so like let's imagine a really common piercing you might need to downsize with like some sort of level of urgency would be like, let's say, a helix piercing. I think we all know the kind of issue of like, you know, the initial jewelry is left in too long, and that can start to have negative effects on the piercing. It can start to tilt over time, you can start to get pressure bumps, you can start to have issues. So it is a good idea to educate your clientele of, you know, you might want to have it downsized at X amount of time. and that's something that we can do for you. Or if you're a student, if you're traveling, if you live somewhere other than where you got the piercing, maybe we can refer you to another studio that we can trust to do that same service. Now, that is such a huge and sticky and complicated scenario. I remember quite a while ago, there were points where like a client would come in and they'd say, oh, I got pierced at such and such studio, and they said if I ever needed a jewelry change or whatever to come see you. And I used to take that as a huge compliment. Oh, great, this studio trusts me to take care of their client, and vice versa. If I was talking to someone and I would say, well, you might want to think about coming in for a downsize at X time, and they'd say, oh, I'm a student somewhere. Now, I kind of look at it as pretty detrimental because of how blind that referral system has gotten. I know that you've dealt with it. It's a point of frustration for you. It's a point of frustration for me. When you get a cold contact from a client, someone you've never worked with, someone who hasn't been pierced by you, and they've just kind of been told, either implicitly or explicitly, go to this other studio and they will do the rest of your service. They'll do your downsize when you need it. A really big point of frustration for me is how arbitrary that timeline seems to be for some studios, or how like unnecessarily rigid it is. I get it all the time. People email and they're like, this studio said that I had to have my piercing downsized at 4 weeks. I want to make an appointment. Or even worse, they just make an appointment and come in for their downsize at 4 weeks without any sort of like checkup, without sending a photo, without talking to us. And how many appointments, how much time has been wasted in our studio? And again, I don't want to have it sound like I'm trying to be Mr. Penny Pincher, but it is a waste of time when someone comes in for a scheduled appointment. We look at their piercing for 5 seconds and say, I'm sorry, you're not ready for a downsize. It might not be 4 weeks for everyone. It might be 6 weeks. It might be 7 weeks for some people. So just saying you need to go to this studio, make an appointment, take their time at 4 weeks without them even seeing it, that can be really detrimental to a studio that's as small as yours, as small as mine, where we have very limited resources on how many appointments we can manage in a day. Again, some studios are giant. They're factories. They can take 50 services in a day. I can't do that in my studio. You can't do that in your studio. So if somebody comes in for a downsize when they're not ready, it's really just a waste of our time. It's a waste of the client's time, but it's probably like not as big of a deal to them as it is to us, because that time could have been a new piercing that was generating revenue for me and my staff and all these other things. So how does that go for you? Because I know that you've dealt with that frustration before.
I've been dealing with that for years and years and years. It's happened twice in the last month that I've had someone referred from another studio. And much like yourself, I'm thrilled when I get referrals. I've had people come into my little shop in Glasgow from every corner of the world. I had someone in from Bahrain the other week. And I was just like, thank you so much that someone in Bahrain is like, yeah, go and see Lola and Glad. Like, that's mind-blowing to me. I love it. And that was actually a terrific interaction. But with that, with the smooth comes the rough as well. And you also get situations where clients are angry at you that they're not ready to be downsized. I've had that before, where someone's like, well, they told me to come in and get it done.
Right,
and
or they think you're an idiot.
And I'm like, I'm sure they did, but that doesn't change the fact that this is still very swollen. It looks fine. It just needs a bit more time. And it kind of feels like they think that I'm making it up because they've been told something else. So I think part of it is, first of all, make sure your clients understand what downsizing is supposed to look like and feel like, what it actually is. So it's not just a date on a calendar that may or may not apply. That's why on my aftercare sheets, I do have the actual photos to show this is what you're looking for, or something like this, so that they can actually understand. Because that's the first thing I'll do, is I'll take out my aftercare sheet, I'll show them the picture, and straight away they'll be like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and they'll get it. I had another incident this last month with a client whose jewellery was not compatible with mine. And that was a situation where we came very close to a breakage, but managed to avoid that from happening. And I just had to say to them, I'm really sorry, but this piece that you're wearing, it's, I tried multiple brands, again, at my own expense, to try and make something work for them. Couldn't come up with anything that was compatible. And all I could say was, I'm really sorry. All I can do is do a full change on the piece and suggest that you when you're able to visit the original place, have them downsize it. You're also going to have those issues as well sometimes. So I think that if you are going to be sending someone to other places, give them a good idea of what that process will be like. If someone says to me and I'm piercing someone and they're like, oh, I'm going to go to Spain or France or Germany in the next couple of months, I'll be happy to refer them to somewhere or refer them to a resource where they can get referrals for somewhere. But I'll always be very clear, call ahead, email ahead. You'll probably be required to purchase either jewelry or a service with them, as opposed to having it done here, just to make sure that they understand they can't just tip up at another studio thousands of miles away and be taken care of like they'll have any idea who I am or what we did, because they won't,
Something that I've found to be extremely helpful for my own clients and my own studio is any piercing where they can't see both sides of it. Helix piercings and conch piercings are going to be very much top of that list. As soon as we're done with the piercing, I say, oh, do you have your phone handy? Can you get it ready for a photo, please? I just want to explain something about the back of your piercing. And I take a photo of the back of the piercing on day one that shows how much slack is visible. And I say, okay, now take a good look at this. This is the slack that's there on day one. Now that slack's for the healing process. Some days you'll wake up and it'll be a little bit swollen or puffy. It'll be using all of that slack. Some days it'll be using, most of that slack, but not all of that slack. And then I want to explain, this is your starter jewelry. This is your healing jewelry. This is your initial jewelry. It will need to be downsized. It will need to be shortened. Sometimes that is, a strong suggestion. Sometimes that is a requirement for the piercing to stay healthy. But you want to understand, what jewelry is day one versus, what jewelry is down the road. Now, what I'll tell them is usually a range. I don't arbitrarily just say 4 weeks because, nobody heals on the same schedule. So I'll say, you're probably going to want to have this downsized maybe somewhere around 5 to 7 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks, whatever your target is, your recommendation is. I'll say, hang on to this photo for reference, and then in 4 weeks and 6 weeks and whatever weeks, take roughly the same photo from roughly the same angle, and then look at how much slack is sticking out. If you don't see any slack sticking out, you're not ready for a downsize yet. If you do see slack sticking out, you might want to go ahead and schedule an appointment with us or contact another studio. Those photos are also great for reference because if they email me and say, hey, am I ready for a downsize? I can say, well, go ahead and send me a photo of the back of your piercing. I'll take a look at it and I'll say yeah, totally. Go ahead and book in on our website, or maybe wait an extra week, wait an extra 2 weeks, something like that. That is what I would love to see people start getting into the habit of, rather than just putting it in the client's head of you have to do it at this magical date, because a lot of people aren't going to be ready at that magical date. And if they go into another studio that's not your studio, all they're going to be doing is wasting that studio's time. And again, I don't want to seem like I'm rude and I'm trying to keep people out of my studio, but I have limited resources and I need to make sure that I use them efficiently. Otherwise, it's just a waste of everyone's time.
Well, I think it's good to remember that as small business owners, we're often put in this position where profitability is a dirty word. Anything that suggests that you make a living doing what you do, it's very, very taboo and you don't ever want to talk about it. But we are constantly hemorrhaging money for so many bills that go to so many people that really don't give a shit what we have to do to make that money. Kind of set ourselves to a different standard that says, I'll do the absolute most that I can, even if it means I make the minimum, service as many people as I can, have all my bills paid. We start to hold ourselves to this impossible standard that says it's not okay to be compensated for my time, which just doesn't work if you're trying to maintain a brick and mortar property, which is incredibly expensive. And that's something I've had to kind of make peace with this past year with inflation and what things have been like in the UK with the energy crisis, is reconciling the fact that I want my services to stay as affordable as they can, but at the same time I can't be losing money on a daily basis because my overheads have gotten so great. And that is a difficult thing to reconcile when you're someone who doesn't want to, put clients out too greatly in terms of their expense, but you also have this growing expenditure on your side. It is a difficult thing to balance. So I think that sometimes, it can be good to talk about things like your time is valuable. You do have to be doing a certain amount of work in it. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned, we don't like to talk about it. It is like a dirty word, an ugly word to talk about profitability. But why are we pretending that we live in a world where that's not a necessity for operating our businesses when unfortunately it is,
Well, I would like to talk about utilizing time efficiently, and I would also like to mention that we are going to be doing another paid webinar.
Are we?
In May. Remember I told you?
Oh, yeah, you did.
So
I'll be there.
We do have an exact date, but I don't want to get up and pick up my phone and I have forgotten the exact date. I will tell you it's in May of 2023, and this will be technique-based. Our last webinar, by the way, thank you so much to everyone who signed up. We talked about jewelry sales. You talked about transitioning away from external thread jewelry, and I talked about ethical sales strategies. I loved it. I loved that day.
Yeah.
It went well, and a lot of people were already asking if we were going to have any going forward in the future. And yes, we are. We're going to have a class available in May. You can go to ryanpba.com and you can click on the Google form and you can read a little bit more about it. It's so new that I haven't really bothered like hitting people over the head on Facebook about it just yet, but you can go to ryanpba.com and get info. Technique-based, I'm going to be talking about nipple piercings, including inverted nipples, HRT affected nipples, and you are going to be talking about
bridge piercings.
I'm
going to be doing another deep dive class on bridge piercings, and this is about the modern history of the bridge piercing, techniques of bridge piercing, aftercare, troubleshooting. There are video material that we're going to look at together of me performing bridge piercings, both freehand and tool-based. I wanted to include both to try and assist, different types of piercers that might be watching. And I really like bridge piercings. I'm a big fan of them. I always have been. And
you're really good at them too.
Thank you. Because there has been a bit of a resurgence of them in the last few years, I really wanted to take the opportunity to make a class about them, because there might not be another time that's as good as this. I taught the class at UKPP last year. I taught it at BMX last year, and both times I was very, very happy with it, and no doubt I'll keep working on it like I do with all my classes. I try and keep them active and up to date, but I'm really pleased with it. As pleased as I was with my PA class, I'm as pleased with the bridge class in terms of the content. So I feel very strongly that if you're someone who wants to be better at bridge piercings or kind of struggles with them, I think that this would be a really helpful class at turning them from being kind of like a worrying piercing, almost in that sort of septum realm, to being something that's actually really fun, because I find them fun.
I've gotten a lot stronger with my bridge piercings after watching you perform some and, watching your class. And it was a really good class. I know that you put it forward as something you were available to teach at the APP conference, but it's a pretty packed schedule this year. It wasn't selected as one of the classes, and
Boo.
I think it's really good to offer it as a webinar for the American piercers that want to be able to see it, the people who weren't lucky enough to be at UK APP or BMXNet. And same thing with my nipple class. I taught it at both of those events, and I got really positive feedback. We were just talking about it before we recorded this episode. I've had a lot of piercers contact me and say that my method for inverted nipples specifically has been really beneficial for them. So I wanted to talk about that. I do have some video content available too, and I'm going to make a special online folder of videos, your bridge videos, my nipple piercing videos, that will be available to everyone who registers for the class. So go ahead and check that out, ryanpba.com. You can get all the info, you can get signed up, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it more as it approaches. Going back to the downsize thing, the timeline is very important, but I also wanted to talk about all the various, maybe not all, but some of the various liability issues that can come up related to downsizing. One big thing that I want to talk about is I don't install any outside jewelry. So some studios might take the opportunity to do an extra add-on sale to say, hey, you will need a downsize. Would you like to buy that post now? Some studios just incorporate their downsize post into their piercing fee, into their service fee. So the client might leave with their downsize post, maybe even already in a sterilized pouch. Sometimes those clients might try to bring that into a different studio, and I want to say really firmly, even if it is a brand that I carry in my studio, I do not install jewelry that was not sold by my studio. Partly because I need to be absolutely sure that it's a brand that I'm comfortable using. I'm an APP member. I will only use APP verifiable materials. There are so many companies out there now making threadless backings, and you know and I know that not all of them have verifiable material, so I'm not willing to just take someone's word for it that they did buy that same quality piece that we're carrying. Even if they did, like, it goes back to the same thing, like, why should I be doing that work for free? If it's so simple, you could be able to do it yourself. But if it's something that you require a professional, you have to support that professional. I don't charge a lot for a downsize post. If we're talking threadless backing, that's a $15 sale, and I'm probably going to add on maybe a $5 to $10 service fee for it. I don't think it's outrageous for me to charge $25 to downsize a piercing if it's the first time you've ever been in my studio. If you're already a client in my studio, if you got your piercing in my studio, chances are we're probably going to drop that service fee, just charge you for the downsize post. But there's a whole bunch of things that go into it, and I'm sure there's more that you can think of too.
Oh yeah. So this is a problem. I remember first posting about this 6 or 7 years ago in a forum, basically saying, because I did have a client.
You complained about it before it was cool.
I did, yeah. Statistically though, I complain about so much that sometimes that stuff just happens by accident. So what happened was a client, I always say a client, a person I've never met came into my place of work wanting to have a piece of jewellery changed. And I can't recall if this was just a change out or if it was a downsize. But basically they had jewellery with them and they said, I've purchased this from X place, from X piercer, and they've told me that you'll fit it. And I said, I'm really sorry, but I don't fit outside jewellery. We're very clear about that.
When you say fit, you mean install.
Yeah.
She's British.
Fit, install outside jewellery. And they were furious. They were very, very angry and upset. And I think they were angry and upset because the purchase of the jewellery had very much hinged on somebody installing it. And in my head, I was like, well, that's misleading then, but it's not me that's misled you. It's the person that sold you that piece of jewellery. If I was always an intrinsic part of this plan without my knowing, then yeah, you've been missold that jewellery basically. And that happened a couple of times with various clients who were like, well, I wouldn't have bought it if I'd have known that no one would fit it for me. And I think that was what led me to make the post, was having to defend myself several times to clients that I'd never met, who had work done by piercers I'd never spoken to, who were, oh yeah, Lola will put this in, buy this and Lola will put it in. And I just had to say, stop doing that, because it's very dishonest, and it's because the buck stops with me. It's me they're going to yell at, and it's me that they are yelling at. That happened multiple times. It still happens today, though to less of an extent, because I think a few more places now are a bit more willing to say, if you're looking to have this fitted, you're going to have to reach out and ask, and I can't guarantee someone will fit this for you. But I have had numerous instances since I opened Forest, specifically with downsizing, specifically with people being supplied pre-packaged sterile librettes to be fitted. And I've had to say, well, I can sell you a libret and fit it for you. It's an inexpensive piece of jewellery. I don't even have an installation charge or a service charge for that. Just buy the libret, I'll be happy to put it in. But if what you're saying is you just want to bring in this jewellery that you bought somewhere else for the piercing you had done somewhere else with the end piece you had done somewhere else, I have to ask how my business is supposed to sustain itself based off of that,
Right.
And the thing that really pushed me over the edge was seeing that, and it wasn't just one place, it's actually numerous places. When you go on their websites, they also explicitly say they don't fit outside jewellery. So I'm like, why are you giving people jewellery away with them? Why are you giving people jewellery and saying, go here, go there, when you would refuse to do this for somebody? So if you're giving your clients instructions to go into other studios that you wouldn't fulfill yourself, please reassess. Just take a second, examine the situation.
I would also like to add in that a lot of our preferences, opinions on these matters are because you are a small business owner, I am a small business owner, and our small businesses are quite a bit smaller than some other small businesses. So we have our personal limitations, personal preferences, personal responsibilities, and all these different things. Sometimes when I look at the analytics of a week, if it's a day where it's mostly new piercings, I can look at the daily total and be like, that's a great day. And then if I look at another day that's really slumped in that week, a fully booked day, but it's down 60% to all the other days around it, I'll get a little bit more deep into the analytics, and I'll look at what those services were. Were they new piercings? where they jewelry changes. I'll talk to Evan about it and I'll be like, why was this day down so much? And sometimes he'll be like, well, all of it was just this stuff where they were like booked, they came in, they didn't contact us ahead of time, but same thing. Another studio said, go there and they'll downsize it. Go there and they'll finish this service essentially. Health and wellness checks that are completely unnecessary when our website says, before you book in for a health or wellness check under this body jewelry sales and service appointment, please just give us a call, please just give us an email, or please email us a clear photo of your piercing, and we can tell you if you actually need to come in for something, or if it's something where we can just tell you on the phone, everything looks healthy, everything looks fine, just continue healing, we'll see you in a few weeks when you're actually ready for a downsize. It's a huge detriment to a small business when even like 1 or 2 days out of a week are down, 20%, 40%, 60% from where they should be, because that money, otherwise, that's what goes to paying the staff, ordering new jewelry, ordering new supplies, and just in general, keeping your studio healthy and strong, keeping it growing. And if all those things are held back because clients want more things for less money, it's just eventually going to start putting shops out of business. And I don't want to be like a panic mongerer or anything, but that's really what it is. Like, if you want businesses to exist, to be able to go in for downsizes and retainers and last minute things and health and wellness checks, they have to be earning a living. Like, there's just no other way around it. And I'm sorry if that sounds cold, but it's just the way the world works now.
Well, I've had that experience before as well, where I've had clients come in for health checks without there being anything wrong, because they've been advised by their piercer, which is completely their prerogative, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but they've been advised by their piercer to just have it checked up on after a month.
Right.
Some places do that, and it's not a bad idea. Like, I'm not suggesting it's a bad idea. And back during a time where we took walk-ins, not a problem at all to drop in, have someone take a quick look. But when you're working private appointment only, I make at most a quarter of the amount of money that I need to make to cover my bare minimum overheads doing wellness checks. So 25% of the bare minimum of what I need to make is what I can make doing wellness checks. So it's not enough to pay the rent on the property, basically. So I offer them as a necessity and something that I have to offer. And I do email as well. And I would always rather, if I get the opportunity to see a problem up close in real life, I just think it's better. So I'm always going to offer that service. But when you have days where you see a couple of clients and they come in and you say, what seems to be the trouble? What can I help with? And they say, oh, everything's fine. I just need you to look at it. And you're just like,
yep.
Really?
I get
really?
that all the time. Like,
You
luckily.
could have just emailed me a picture.
Luckily, I get, our town is much smaller than Glasgow. Our client base is much smaller. So we're very fortunate that a lot of people call or email first and they say, oh, I just want to come in and have somebody take a look at my piercing. And it's like, rather than just being like, why? It's always just like, oh, is there an issue with it? Is it sore? Do you have unexpected discharge? How old is it? Blah, 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 blah. Whatever it might be. And most of the time we can say like, well, there's really no need to come in. If you're concerned about anything, why don't you start with a photo? And then if we see anything troubling or concerning, please come on in. We're happy to take a look at it if there's anything to look at. But again, it just goes back to that thing of like, let's imagine a world where you only have 12 spots available in a day. Do you want to be using up one of those spots to take a 10-second look at something and be like, yep, it's perfectly healthy? I'm not saying to ignore clients. I'm not saying to cut those different courtesy services completely, but you do have to have an efficient day. So what I like to do now is rather than saying rely on us for any little thing, I always say, here's our card. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to get in touch with us. We'll be back to you as soon as possible. Give us a call, give us an email, send us a photo, all those things. That's what I try to tell people first. Not just show up, not just book in. Call us or email us first, and then whatever we need, we'll take care of it for you. We want to get you in. We want to resolve any sort of issue, but if there is no issue to resolve, let's do it electronically, please.
Yeah, and similarly with switching things out to retainers at the last minute, if someone does send across a picture and it's in any way alarming, at this point, I don't even stress emailing back and forward. I just say, look, I'm going to block off a time for you at the end of the day, so it's there guaranteed. We can keep emailing back and forth about this, but there's a space for you at the end of the day. You can come see me when I close if I'm full, and I'll look at it before I go home because I don't want you to be left with this.
Sure.
I've done that more times than I can count. I'll always do it. I'm happy to do it.
You tell me so many times in a week, like, oh, I'm just going to stay a little bit late and I'm going to do this check, or I'm just going to stay a little bit late or do that.
Right.
We do that all the time too. You know, like we'll call somebody, we'll bend over backwards. We'll be like, you know, we have 15 minutes open here. We can stay here. We can come in early tomorrow. You can come in on my lunch break. Like, we want to help out everybody with every problem. But a lot of these people, there is no issue. They just want the reassurance that everything is still fine. Yeah. And we can do a lot of that through email.
So that's one of the other things, to go back to my checklist. I'm just thinking in my head of the little kind of disclaimers that I have on my website about I've been pierced somewhere else, can Forrest help me? One of the other things is we don't insert outside jewelry, even if it's come from somewhere awesome, even if it's come in a sterile packet, because it's not, okay, we'll do it with these caveats. I personally, and I think that you and me are maybe a bit different on this, I'm not sure. I don't like saying yes for some, no for others. I'll decide. I'll just, make it up on the day.
Yeah,
I like
you have a policy.
I like to have a clear policy that applies to everyone. I feel like policies that don't apply to everyone are, especially when it comes to things like jewelry quality, a little classist. Obviously, I appreciate the irony of saying that as someone that sells verified titanium and solid gold. Obviously, I'm super pro high quality implant grade jewelry. But there are a lot of people out there wearing various qualities of jewelry, and I really don't want to go down the path of saying, well, I'll help you because you look like you spent a lot of money, but I won't help you because I think your jewelry is trash. You're going to have to... it makes me very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And I would really rather just say, you know what? I don't care where you've had this done, how much you spent, how much or how little. I'll be happy to help you, but you'll need to, purchase a retainer, purchase a downsizing post, and that's it. It's simple. And I'm not showing favoritism for certain brands or certain piercers. And listen, some unverified titanium looks pretty damn good. That's why there is a verifying program now, because it has gotten harder and harder to tell great quality from good quality from not so good quality. It's not as clean cut as a great looking piece of jewelry and a bad looking piece of jewelry. That's the whole reason there are programs like this now. So if someone's saying, well, I can look at the jewelry and tell, I'm not sure that that's always going to be the case, you know?
So we walked past a studio in Amsterdam, and it looked like in a very touristy part of town. We stopped and looked in their front window display, and it was full of jewelry that someone with an uneducated eye would look at it and be like, look at all that beautiful gold jewelry. And then we looked at the price, and it was like €12, €15, and you're like, no way is that solid gold. And it's like, again, it gets very murky. It gets very complicated to tell like what's good stuff and what's not good stuff. You don't want to find out that something is not good stuff halfway through changing it when you accidentally break it. But I do also want to talk more about downside stuff and like various liabilities where it starts to become a slippery slope. Let's imagine a scenario where somebody gets pierced in another studio. They come in to have something downsized, and even if it's a high quality piece of jewelry, even if you're being as careful as possible, like what happens if the jewelry breaks? We all know that pins can break. We all know that pins can break relatively easy from even some very reliable companies. So what happens if a piece of jewelry breaks, and you didn't sell it? What happens if it's a piece of jewelry from a company that you don't carry? Like how do you handle that scenario? Do you say like, well, I guess I'll just give you a free piece out of my stock that I paid for, and I've received almost no money from you. Let's say that you install jewelry from somewhere else, and then a month goes by and a stone falls out of it, or a threaded piece unthreads and falls off, or whatever, and they're gonna message you and they're gonna say, you are incompetent, you installed it incorrectly, now it's broken, now it's damaged, now you're liable even though I didn't buy it from you.
I can't remember it in great detail, but there was an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David finds a watch. I can't remember. I think it was David Schwimmer. So I think that David Schwimmer loses his watch. Larry David finds it and then says, oh, I found your watch. But then Larry David loses it And then David Schwimmer's like, so you owe me a watch. It was in your possession and you lost it. And he's like, but you already lost it. And he was like, yeah, but then you found it and lost it. And it becomes this whole thing. And it's very much like that. Like, who touched it last? Who's responsible? And I have had a piece of gold jewelry break on removal.
Same.
And unfortunately, that client was an angel. They were the first people to be like, oh, you know what? Like, it did feel a bit weird when I put it on. I really it was really really stuck on there. And I've managed to avoid that situation happening again, thankfully. But I did make an alteration to my policy after that, where I now explicitly tell any client who's just purchasing a downsize but who's retaining their original end piece, like, just to make you aware, we're not covered for breakages for this. Our sales policy, our sales guarantee does not extend to replacing items that were purchased elsewhere. If it breaks, you're going to have to return it to the person you purchased it from.
Which is great, and it immediately makes me think that I need to put that in my release form.
Yeah, and I do try and reassure people. I say, look, I know this is really, really unlikely, but I just have to let you know, just on the off chance. And I've removed some jewelry for people that has had a very chewed up pin that looks like it's been either taken on and off a bunch of times or bent multiple times, where it looks like it's something that could have broke, because this is something that's been used over and over. And it's not completely out of the realms of reality that it could break or snap. And if it snaps in your hand, you need to have had some kind of policy in place for that to help prevent an awkward situation like that from happening.
I've had so many issues come up where it's like, this was a really nice piece of jewelry before you probably had it initially installed. I've had like $500 BVLA seam rings that were installed improperly, and now the seam is like embedded in the center of a piercing, and it's like, I can't even take this out because it wasn't installed properly initially, and now like it's kind of ruined your piercing, where if I take it out, you have no piercing anymore. I've had threaded pieces that were very obviously cross-threaded but just forced onto a piece where it's like, it's on but it's not coming back off, and like I've had all kinds of issues come up. Not trying to like slam other studios, because we can make mistakes too. One of the most annoying things that I've ever had to deal with is I bought this jewelry when I was in a completely different city at a completely different time from a completely different studio, and now it's broken. And they told me to contact you and that you would handle the return for me because you carry this brand. And it's like, what? Like, I didn't even sell it, and now you want me to accept like liability of shipping it back to the company to get it repaired for you with like no cost, like all these things. I remember somebody brought in a pair of marquee stone eyelets from Anatometal. Not cheap jewelry, not cheaply made jewelry, really excellently put together jewelry, but all the tips of the marquee gems were all cracked and shattered. Mm-hmm. Some of them had fallen out of settings because the person just never took care of their jewelry. And then like they were told by the person who sold it to them, oh yeah, Anatometal has a lifetime guarantee on all their jewelry. I contacted Anatometal and they're like,
they don't, do they?
No. Anatometal was like, oh, we're not going to cover that because like it's it wasn't taken care of, and that's why all these stones are broken and popped out of the setting. We can repair it for X amount of money, but that's going to come out of your account because you're the one sending it back to us. And I was like, what? And it turned into this whole thing where it was like, you're telling me that it's going to cost me however much money to get somebody else's jewelry that was purchased somewhere else repaired, and I have to pay shipping costs back to you. And it just turned into this whole thing of just like, what exactly do you think my business is meant to do? Like it turned into this whole ridiculous thing.
A lot. I mean, that's a whole other episode in and of itself.
Sure.
But a lifetime guarantee and manufacturer defects aren't the same thing. A lifetime guarantee for manufacturer defect
is against manufacturer
defect. That means that something has happened at the manufacturer's
they set
point
a stone
of production
improperly or whatever,
where something like that has happened, and that is what's caused it to break. Not because you stand on it or because your dog chews it up. That's not a manufacturer defect.
Wear and tear is not the same thing as manufacturer defects, nor is improper installation, improper handling, or just like beating up a piece of jewelry. Here's a good scenario that's very rare. I had a client buy a mini Moody from BVLA.
Oh, right.
One of those things where it's like multiple concentric rings with like a clicker, a clicker mechanism. They took it out, they put it down on their coffee table, their dog chewed it up and swallowed it. So they contacted me and they're like, my dog swallowed the jewelry. And I was like, well, bummer, you know? And then the next day they called me back and said, oh, I got the jewelry back. And I was like, how? And you know how.
Yeah.
And then they were like, yeah, it's all like chewed up and the clicker mechanism is all messed, you know, so I wanted to get it sent back to BVLA.
I should think so. It's been through a dog's digestive system.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't know. But like, you know, they had spent like hundreds and hundreds of dollars on it. And it's not like they could just drop it on, you know, that same amount on another piece. So I was like, wash it as thoroughly as you can with soap and water, please. You know, do whatever you can to clean it. They brought it back in. I processed it like any used jewelry, sent it back to BVLA with an explanation, and BVLA called me back and they're like, what happened to this jewelry? And I explained, and it was just, we were just laughing hysterically on the phone. And, you know, and I think that person today is probably wearing it in their septum, you know? And it's just like ridiculous scenarios will come up, but it's like, you know, at a certain point, that's not a manufacturer's defect.
Right.
There should be no, you know, understanding that like the company's just going to fix it for free forever.
So obviously I have a sales policy in my studio that I've tried to make as generous and as open as possible to try and help customers shop with confidence. But there is going to be a point where, you know what, you've purchased this thing, you've been wearing it for months or years, everything's been fine with it. If something has happened to it in your possession and it has now broken, neither myself nor the manufacturer can be financially responsible for that. We can assist you with having the piece repaired or whatever it is that needs doing to it, but there is sometimes a cost to maintaining your own property, and that's something else that as the industry has rapidly expanded into using jewellery that has a higher and higher value, we're not often real clear about. So that's something that I've been trying to be clear about with people this last year is what's guaranteed, what isn't, what your rights are, so that people understand what their rights are at a minimum. I think making sure people have gateways to understand, like, this is what we can do for you, this is what we're choosing to do for you, and this is what we won't do for you. I think that that's really important for studios to grow into.
Well, you know, what you're saying is kind of a theme that I would like to start tying together is, number one, what are your studio policies? If you can't even answer what your own studio policies are, sit down and work it out with your staff, with the studio owner, with the piercers, the counter staff, all that stuff. Figure it out, you know, figure out what it is. It's like, what jewelry will we install? What jewelry will we not install? What is our policy for referrals? What is our policy for accepting work from referrals? You need to have all that stuff figured out so that you're not just trying to like wing it in the moment. Everybody in any piercing position in your studio, whoever's answering the phone, whoever's handling the front counter, whoever is providing the services, they should all understand what those policies are and what those policies specifically are not. When it comes to, you know, outside referrals, really try to think about the fact that other studios might have different policies than the personal policies in your studio. And if your service, if your sale hinges on, okay, we need to be able to refer you to somewhere else, talk to those other studios first, or tell the client to contact those studios first before they book in. You don't want to make yourself look like a fool. You don't want to make the other studio look like an ogre or whatever else. So, you know, try to think about policies. Try to think about policies in a world where, like, things cost money, you know?
Yeah, I think that that's the main takeaway for me is, like, don't expect another studio to do something that you yourself actively refuse to do. And don't wave off concerns about other studios. If a client says to me, you know, I'm going to be traveling to this place or that place, are they going to be able to help me? I'm not ever going to say like, definitely just go in, they'll do whatever you need to be, you know, I'll make sure they understand that it's a different business. There are different staff, different policies. What I'll say is, I know this is a reputable studio. I'm sure they'll be happy to help you. Just contact them in advance, find out what you would need to book and how best they can assist you. I don't imply that it's something that's going to be free or that it's going to be a guarantee that they can just walk in and they'll know all about it, because we don't know each other. I think that that's a really clear differentiation, because those are the most egregious situations I've been in with clients where they're very cross and angry that they've spent potentially a lot of money on something that they now either can't use or can't maintain because they were given information that wasn't entirely truthful. And I would like to give people the benefit of the doubt and think that it's not a deliberate act, but when it happens over and over and over again, it becomes a deliberate act.
Mm-hmm. the body piercing industry is no longer the land of milk and honey.
Where did I miss the milk and honey? Obviously, I've come into it at the wrong time. For me, it's never been milk. Buckfast and chips, maybe, but never milk and honey.
Well, so, that same piercer who posted, they were very disappointed because they have that kind of idea that, body piercing is all things for all people, and we should do everything we possibly can to do everything we possibly can. And it's like, yes, that's what my studio goals are also. That's what your studio goals seem to be also.
Yeah, they've referred someone to me before. Yeah. Thank you.
But, there is the reality of it too. That same client that probably called you and said, oh, I've been told no by these 6 other piercers. Was it something where they were just like, hey, I want to come in 5 minutes and have my retainer changed? And that studio was like, nope. And it's like, well, I'd probably say nope also. If it's the whole I will agree that it is kind of crummy if you say we're only willing to downsize if you get a new back and a new front. Yeah. You do want to have some flexibility to help people maintain their body piercings. Right. And not everything can be or should be a full charge service. But there's definitely going to be a lot more in the middle than anything at either pole.
Yeah.
So you have to be flexible. You have to be realistic. We all have our own different limitations. We all have our own different policies. Try to be understanding of each other. But if what you're trying to get frustrated about is what's going on in another studio, maybe try to change your expectations for what other studios are doing. If you can offer a level of excellence, a level of service where you can do all things for all people at all times, awesome. You're doing better than I am because I can't do that. But, I want to have understanding on both sides of it. Yeah. I want to have some acceptance, and I want to try to give people as much slack as possible.
Plus, I don't know if I'm just kind of cheesy or whatever, but if I'm sending someone to another studio where a friend works, I want that person to buy stuff at that studio. If I'm go and see Seb and Marie at Highland Hyacinth, go and see Nikki at Blue Lotus, go and see Helen at Holier Than Thou, go and see Nikki at Bold and Gold. If I'm sending someone to one of those studios, I want them to spend money there and support those small businesses, just like I would hope and have been sent customers from those studios who want them to patronize my business, So yeah. It's not that I want to get something from a friend's business for free. It's that I want people to go and spend money in those businesses. So yeah. I know that's kind of just a sentimental thing for me, but I would never be here, I'm going to give you this jewelry, take it to this other relatively new or small business that I know, and just they'll put it in for you for free. I would hate that.
Try to look at it this way. Can you think of a single restaurant where you can bring in your own steak and ask them to cook it for you for free?
Yeah.
Anyway, we can go down a long, long hole.
Well, that's the point, is that this was just a little spark of conversation from a completely reasonable source of frustration that came from a really good place that actually sparked all of these different avenues of thought, and how sometimes something as simple as why don't you just do it, is actually more complicated.
Nuance.
Especially some of these situations we've discussed haven't just happened to me once or twice. They've happened to me enough that I have a policy on it.
Yeah.
Do you know how often something has to happen before I actually log into my website and write a policy for it?
Yeah.
But several times.
Well, I want to thank anybody who, posted on that thread. I read a lot of those comments, and a lot of it was very passionate. A lot of it hinged around but you got to be able to be compassionate and try to help everybody. And it's yes, I want to get there too, but we still got to pay our bills. So speaking of paying bills, I would very much like it if you would give patreon.com/RyanPBA a chance.
What, me?
Well, yeah, you can too, but it's $15 a month. And there's so much content on there. I don't even want to get into it, but there's hours and hours and hours of video content available to you on there. Lots of narrated piercing content, and I have a lot more on the way. We've got our webinar available for registration now, coming up in May on nipple piercing and bridge piercing. You and I will both be at this year's Association of Professional Piercers Conference in Las Vegas. We'll be teaching safe practices in the piercing room. And we'll be doing a special live episode of the Piercing Wizard podcast as part of the Alternative to the Bar entertainment for those that don't want to have alcohol-soaked fun in Las Vegas. you can come and watch a live Piercing Wizard podcast, and we are trying to work out some interesting topics and interesting guests for you. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Slola Slider, for talking to me on this episode. And
thank you, Ryan Willett.
Where can people find you on the internet?
They can't find me.
You can find me, Ryan PBA, on Instagram, and who cares? Anyway, don't find me. I love you. Bye. For more information about the show, visit piercingwizardpodcast.com or like Piercing Wizard Podcast on Facebook. For more info about your host, visit precisionbodyarts.com or search Ryan PBA on Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. If you enjoy the show, you can subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcast, and Google Play. Music by Benny B. Blanco. Show copyright 2017, Precision Body Arts LLC, all rights reserved.